Good evening. It's wonderful to be here for the celebration of Irish culture and the many outstanding achievements of Irish women, 3 of whom you will hear from tonight. I direct the Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement, which is responsible for organizing and producing the literary programming at the library, most notably our wildly popular National Book Festival, as well as tonight's event. On August 29th, we will hold our 20th festival, which promises to be the biggest and best ever. I hope to see you all at the Washington Convention Center on August 29th. Mark your calendars. How many of you in the audience have been to the festival? Excellent, nice to see you. If you've been to the festival, then you know how popular it is. In fact, so many of our more than 200,000 attendees love the festival that they have asked us to extend it for more than just a single day. Which is why we're having this program called Fearless, a tribute to Irish American women. It's part of our new year-round series, the National Book Festival Presents. Our goal with this series is to bring you throughout the year literary programs of the caliber you've come to expect from us at the day-long National Book Festival. Tonight's program honors St. Bridget's Day, which celebrates the creativity of women everywhere. Our next program is a tribute to civil rights icon Rosa Parks on February 13th at 7 p.m. The program features the eminent historians Douglas Brinkley and Jeannie Theoharis. For tickets to this event and all of our other National Book Festival Presents events, you can go to loc.gov, Bookfest. And if you haven't already, be sure to come back and see our extraordinary Rosa Parks exhibit in this building, which is another way in which we're acknowledging the achievements of fearless women. Speaking of fearless women, our National Book Festival this August 29th will offer a Fearless Women series, the chance to learn more about women who achieve great things as related by authors discussing their books on the festival's various stages. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Daniel Mulhall from the Embassy of Ireland, which is co-sponsoring this event. In fact, it was the Embassy of Ireland that first brought the idea for this program to the library. Ambassador Mulhall has been the Irish ambassador to the United States since 2017. Prior to that, he was his country's ambassador to Malaysia, Germany, and then the UK, United Kingdom. Ambassador Mulhall is a Yeats Scholar and a great supporter of poetry and literature in the nation's capital. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for all your support in bringing this program to the Library of Congress. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador Daniel Mulhall.
Ladies and gentlemen, or as we say in Irish, Agrina Ushla, which means noble people, which certainly covers everyone in this Library of Congress. I want to thank our friends at the library, of course, Sherry Werb, who's just spoken, Maria Rana and Robert Casper. And I want to pay a special tribute to my colleague Lillian Farrell, who really came up with the idea of having this event and is here in the front row here. And she's done a great amount of work to make this event become a reality. It's a real honor for me to be here in this magnificent building for an event to mark St. Bridget's Day, a day when we celebrate the contribution of women in Ireland and of Irish women all over the world. For me, as a frequent speaker on public occasions, it's a relief to be speaking here tonight about Bridget rather than Brexit. I prefer the sound of the word Bridget. It's more euphonic to my mind anyway. Now, you may be wondering, who is St. Bridget? Very good question. According to tradition, St. Bridget was a 5th and 6th century abbess of the monastery at Kildare near Dublin. Of course, she may also be, in the words of the Dictionary of Irish Biography, where there's an entry on, a rather long entry on Bridget, she may also be what they call an elusive personality from, quote, the period of transition between paganism and Christianity. So there may be a certain amount of shall we say, transitioning from perhaps a pagan goddess into a Christian saint. But nonetheless, either way, Bridget has long been venerated in Ireland and in other countries to which Irish monks travelled in the Middle Ages, and also in countries where the Irish settled around the world in more recent centuries. And one tradition associated with St. Bridget is the making of crosses from reeds in her memory. For decades, St. Bridget's cross was the symbol of Irish television. Now, a century ago, Ireland was a notably progressive place when it came to the role of women in public life. Various suffrage and women's political organizations were established in the Ireland of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There was the Ladies' Land League in the 1880s and 90s. There was Ineen na hÉireann, or the Daughters of Ireland, in the early part of the 20th century. Cumann na mBan, the organization of women founded in the early 20th century. And here in America, the Ladies' Ancient Order of Hibernians was founded 125 years ago this year, which was a nationalist organization committed to supporting the cause of Irish independence. Now, the first woman elected to the Westminster Parliament was an Irish woman, Constance Markievicz, although she did not take her seat in London, preferring instead to sit in the newly created Irish Parliament, which declared our independence unilaterally in January 1919. In the decades after independence, I have to confess that Ireland became a more restrictive place for Irish women. Many women who had been active in our independence struggle in the first 2 decades of the 20th century were disappointed by the evolution of our country after independence. In recent decades, however, we've seen great transformation in the status of Irish women, part of the changes that have transformed Irish society during the last 3 or 4 decades. In the 1990s, we elected 2 women as our presidents, Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese. So between them, they were president for 21 years, which is an extraordinary achievement and an extraordinary phenomenon. Everyone knows about the phenomenon of St. Patrick's Day, which of course is enjoyed with special gusto in this country, I've discovered. It's kind of, I've even discovered something here that I didn't come across before, which is halfway to St. Patrick's Day parties. It's a fantastic tradition. I attended recently, or last year, the halfway to St. Patrick's Day party in New Orleans. It was a great event, I can tell you. They really enjoyed themselves immensely. And this year, we've tried to push out the idea of celebrating St. Bridget's Day around the world, and 35 of our embassies have already organized St. Bridget's Day events all over the world. And our consulates around the United States have been active in paying tribute to Irish women and their contribution to this country. Personally, in traveling around the United States, I've come across many accounts of Irish American mothers and grandmothers who transmitted a powerful sense of Irish identity and the strong values to their families. I'm delighted to have 3 wonderful Irish American women here this evening from different walks of life, reflecting on the women in their lives, and I look forward to learning more about Irish American women from their experiences coming up soon. Now, one of the areas where Irish women have come to the fore in recent years is in literature. Many of you will have heard of the young Irish prize-winning author Sally Rooney, whose books are a bit of a sensation these days, and Edna O'Brien, who's now in her late 80s, recently published her latest novel, which is about the Boko Haram girls, young women in Nigeria. And she went to Nigeria to research that book, an extraordinary feat by a woman in her late 80s. And then, of course, Anne Enright, another prize-winning Irish woman, author. So there are many Irish women among those, and there are many, many Irish women who are leading the charge for Irish literature in the 21st century. And while all 4 20th century Irish Nobel Prize winners for literature were men, I am confident that in the 21st century, a number of Irish women will achieve that distinction. So in this hallowed palace of books, in this shrine to the written word. And as part of the National Book Festival, I want to read a poem by an Irish poet called Moya Cannon, a woman from Donegal, which was commissioned to mark St. Bridget's Day this year. And St. Bridget's Day is also the first day of spring in Ireland. It comes a bit later here in Washington, but we regard the 1st of February, Bridget's Day, as the first day of spring. And it was commissioned by Galway, the city of Galway in the west of Ireland, which is Europe's city of culture for 2020. This is a poem for St. Bridget's Day by Moya Cannon. Now at spring's awakening, short days are lengthening. And after St. Bridget's Day, I'll set my sail. A blind man on a stone bridge in Galway or the road to Loughrea felt the sun's rays in his bones again and praised the sycamore and oak, crops still drowsy in the seed, wheat, flax, and oats. His song rising, he praised Ackle's eagle, Ern's hawk, and in beloved Mayo, young lambs, kids, foals, and little babies turning towards birth. Blind Raftery invoked Bridget, Ceres of the North, born into slavery at Fogart, near Dundalk, to an Irish chieftain and a foreign slave. Why, of all small girls in so distant a century born, is she honoured still in place names, constant wells, new rushes platted to protect hearth, home, and herd? Bridget, goddess, druidess of oak or saint, a girl who gifted her father's sword to a beggar for bread. We who have wounded the engendering seas and earth beg you to teach us again before it grows too late your neglected, painstaking arts of nature and of care. So, in memory of St. Bridget and the women of Ireland, who, as President Mary Robinson once memorably said, went from rocking the cradle to rocking the world. Thank you very much. I now hand over. I want to invite Louise Donnelly and Tanya Kiang from the Gallery of Photography Ireland to make a few remarks about the photo album of the Irish. Thank you very much. It's going to be an honor.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ambassador. It's a huge honour to be here in the Library of Congress this evening. On behalf of my colleagues Trish Lamb and Louise Donnelly at the Gallery of Photography in Ireland, I'd like to thank the Library, and thanks also to Lillian Farrell at the Irish Embassy and to the Government of Ireland's Immigrant Support Programme for funding the photo album of the Irish project. The project is a digital archive, and there's also a book which is available outside for free. The archive is built from contributions from the family photo albums, or often the biscuit tins, of ordinary people with Irish heritage. It aims to give a more grounded insight into our social history and to bring to life individual stories that official histories often overlook. Over the course of last year, we organised scanning sessions with partner organisations around the East Coast. And here's my colleague Louise with Alice McDermott here in DC. Or here's another contributor, Beth McNally, at the Massachusetts session, which took place in the Irish Cultural Center of New England. This is one of Beth's contributions with her own annotation. It shows her parents and her Aunt Dorothy as a girl. This evening, 72 years after this photo was taken, Dorothy has travelled from Massachusetts to be here this evening. Thanks to Beth's organisation of her albums, we're able to trace Dorothy's mother, Mary Jane, from the time in 1927 when the McNallys left Northern Ireland for Boston with their 2 young sons. And through the wizardry of digitization, to actually see this woman and to get a sense of the person and a powerful blast of connection and empathy. It's not always so. Women have all too often been hidden from history, sometimes literally so. In this photo, taken in New York in the 1880s, contributed by Chris Murray here in DC, the baby is Chris's grandfather, Thomas Brown, while baby's mother is shrouded in the background. But fast forward a generation, the baby has grown up and settled down with this lovely lady, Margaret Donovan, originally from County Cork, and here she is with baby Rita, Chris's mother, in New York in 1915. Around the same time, these 3 sisters, Bridget, happily enough, Nora and Anne Carr, arrived from County Galway. And as with so many Irish immigrants, these women worked in service. Across all our contributors' albums, we discovered there are lots of visits back home. There is much more to and fro across the Atlantic. It is indeed a two-way street. One woman who went from the States to Ireland was Molly Childers. Here she is in Massachusetts, shooting a target pistol. And a decade later, in 1914, here's Molly steering the Asgard, the yacht that brought hundreds of rifles to Howth to arm the Irish volunteer movement, an act with momentous consequences. So we have truly historic photograph, but we also have those that capture iconic moments in Irish American culture. Here, from Cormac O'Malley's album, is his father, the revolutionary and writer Ernie O'Malley, with Maureen O'Hara, John Wayne, and John Ford, on the set of the quintessential Irish-American love story, The Quiet Man, in Mayo in 1951. Or here, Cormac himself gets to hang out with his father and John Wayne. How cool is that? But for all that kind of celebrity, the real stars in this project are the women who produce, direct, and have leading roles in the drama known as family life. Look, for example, here in the center is Moira Kennedy, who sadly passed away only Christmas before last. Moira was the first director of the Ireland Funds, but I think this picture honors her in a way she herself might have valued more. Or look at our contributor Abigail Parker's grandmother, Loretta Parker, who, despite mental health issues, raised 12 children. Or Mary Rose McNally again, here with her 8 children, and you see Dorothy poking around the corner. And you see her making music, making fun things happen for the family. The project also makes visible quiet heroines like Mary Jane Eames, and she's here in the center in her apron, and the baby there is Alice McDermott. I leave Alice herself to take up the story, but would like to conclude by saying that it has been a pleasure and a privilege to work with these photographs. Just as with everyone's album, these photos are full of love, and they are full of life, and they make the world a kinder, more hopeful place. Thank you.
Good evening. Well, I get to have an Oprah moment straight away because I need to let you all know that the book you just heard about, there's a free copy for everybody in the audience. Woo! So thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for that. or it'll be a gay burn moment if you're Irish. I'm Eugene Flanagan, Director of General and International Collections here at the Library of Congress. And the Library of Congress, as you probably know, is the world's largest library. And it is my great good fortune to be associated with our international collections, which cover most regions of the world, from the Americas, Europe, and Africa to the Middle East, Asia, and Oceania, doing so in an estimated 470 languages. For many areas of the world, our collections are the finest and most comprehensive research collections outside the country of origin. Given the richness of these collections, we want everyone to know that your story is here too, that the door is always open and a warm welcome ready for those from all walks of life who are curious to explore their history and heritage. Tonight, we are shining a light on the Irish-American story. As a Dubliner myself, and I did get a little teary-eyed at mention of St. Patrick's Day, and hoping St. Bridget's Day is a little easier on mind and body. But as a Dubliner, I'm especially proud from Ireland and honoured to introduce our panel of extraordinary Irish women tonight. Alice McDermott is a world-renowned writer who has translated the Irish experience in America to tales that are beloved by Irish and non-Irish readers alike. Her National Book Award-winning novel, Charming Billy, in words at once both beautiful and deeply moving, tells the story of a member of a Long Island community of Irish descent, from his death to his falling in love to his shocking discovery of what happened to the Irish girl he hoped to marry. Her critically acclaimed latest novel, The Ninth Hour, is set in Brooklyn among a group of nuns at the beginning of the 20th century. The Associated Press called the book stunning, adding that McDermott has created a haunting and vivid portrait of an Irish Catholic clan in the early 20th century America. The New York Times added that though already known and admired for her portrayals of family life, she has now extended her range and deepened it. Alice is joined by Representative Mary Gay Scanlon, an education and human rights advocate representing Pennsylvania's 5th District. The Congresswoman was sworn in on November 13th, 2018. Previously, Representative Scanlon served as a national pro bono counsel at a major U.S. law firm where she directed more than 600 lawyers, providing more than 15,000 hours annually to low-income and nonprofit clients. She currently serves as Vice Chair of the House Judiciary Committee and on the Rules Committee and the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, and I am happy to say she is also a member of the Library of Congress Caucus. Moderating our discussion is the award-winning host of CBS News' Face the Nation and Network's senior foreign affairs correspondent based in Washington. Margaret Brennan has reported on politics, international affairs, and global markets since 2002. She joined CBS News in 2012 and was named White House and senior foreign affairs correspondent in 2017. Margaret is here also to tell us of her Irish origins and to lead the conversation. So please join me in welcoming Alice, Mary, and Margaret to the stage.
Hello, good evening to all of you. This has got to be one of the most beautiful buildings in Washington, and it's great to be here on stage with you all. And I want to make sure that you get to know our panelists. As you've already been told, the Congresswoman may leave for a vote, so I want to make sure I get the most out of them for you. As a professional moderator, I'm always focused on that, but I'm actually participating in the conversation too. I want to start out with this idea of what it means to be, I think that's my microphone. Is that my necklace that's bothering you all? I'm going to take that off. In talking about what it means to be Irish American, I'm Margaret Mary Siobhan Brennan, if that's not Irish enough for you. I'm on my mom's side 5th generation, so they came during the famine. I know a little bit less about them. I know they're from the Sligo area. My dad's side, 3rd generation. So that means uncles of mine have their Irish passport, and I know a little bit more about that side of the family. And it's kind of a bit more typical. Lots of policemen. My great-grandfather worked at Fulton Fish Market. Lived in Manhattan. Both sides of the family came in for New York and Philly. And then they kind of hit fast forward in that you jump ahead a generation, another generation, you had a judge, my father worked on Wall Street, and you have me as a journalist. Kind of a quick acceleration in terms of the American immigrant experience. But I always grew up knowing that I was a hyphenated identity, Irish American, and grew up proud of that. My parents had me in Irish step dancing classes at age 5. Alice, for you, what was your consciousness about that? I mean, how did your family get here?
Well, thank you, Margaret. The photograph up here sort of encapsulates at least my maternal Irish. All my grandparents were born in Ireland, so I'm second generation on both sides. The little one over here is my mother, who was baptized Mildred Nora Ames, but as she Americanized, became a teenager, she changed her middle name to Dolores. It was more Hollywood than Nora. The two children next to her are her cousins, Helen and Alice. She called them her sisters. So Mary Jane, those two's mother, left Donegal at the turn of the last century. Very much the demographic of the Irish immigrant. She was 17, she traveled alone, she was the first to leave, she came to New York, she went into domestic service, and she sent for everybody else, including her younger sister, Katie Ames, who was my grandmother. Katie married, had 3 children, my mother was the third, and she died when my mother was 3 months old. So Mary Jane, a widow herself by this time, with 4 children of her own in Brooklyn, took my mother as an infant and raised her as her own. And they became Americans. So the stories of Ireland were about bitter memories. And to be American and to be from Brooklyn was always better than the Irish part.
The hyphenated bit.
The hyphenated bit was the emphasis was on the American.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. My mom's side, she always emphasized that a bit more. Congresswoman, what is your family experience here? How fast was that track from immigrant to elected representative in the esteemed legislative branch just across the way?
A little bit longer, as I understand it. My father was about 7th generation Irish, or Irish American, 7 generations here. And through to my father, everyone married other Irish American heritage folks. He went off the farm, so my mom's family was German and English and Lord knows what else. But because that was a little more muddled, there was definitely much more emphasis on the Irish American heritage. And so things happen like you end up with the name Mary Gay, which is actually short for Mary Gaynor. But there were so many Marys in the family, all the Mary Kathleen's and the Mary Robertas and Moras and various variations on Mary that you had to have a couple names or flip them around or do something different so you could tell who you were calling.
I always joke about I'm Margaret Mary. It's either Margaret Mary or Mary Margaret.
That's
There's
right.
really very
Which
few
are you gonna be?
variations.
But I'm hearing echoes of my family and what you're talking about. So, the Irish tend to be a bit wordy. So lawyers and teachers, a few politicians, a fair number of clergy. So, kind of trending towards words and the fact that you never let, you never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So that was kind of part of the upbringing.
And what does it mean for you when you say, for you, Alice, Irish American, that was more the emphasis versus the Irish? Where do you draw that distinction? For me, from age 5 onward, it was me in Irish step dancing classes a few hours a week. And that became a huge formative thing for me at a very young age. I was a competitive kid. I was out there at dance competitions. My parents were driving me up and down the East Coast, going to a fesh at least once a month. and seeing that part of an Irish American community. It wasn't that unusual in the town I grew up in Connecticut, because I went to a Catholic school where my mom's family had been in that town for a while, and that was where the Irish Catholic kids went versus the Italian Catholic kids went to the other place, and the Polish Catholic kids went to the other place down the road in the opposite direction. The demographics of that have completely changed in the town that I grew up in. But at that moment, it was really not unusual for me to have had that path and that exposure to that snapshot of Irish American identity. And it was kind of through that that I learned, obviously, about Irish music, about, down to my dance costumes and picking the designs from the Book of Kells, and learning a bit more about the culture versus just the family experience of what you talk about, whether it's the lullabies or the St. Patrick's Day celebrations or that snippet of Irish culture that many Irish Americans get. I experienced it in a different way than my siblings did, through music and through dance. And then I turned 16 and I go and I study abroad in Ireland on a program called Irish Way, and all of a sudden, I'm in Ireland at 16 years old, having people look at me, calling me the American.
Yes, right.
The family I was staying with, oh, the American.
Right.
I'm like, wait a second, I thought I was Irish. And learning that there is that thing in between you talked about, Alice, and that is so unique. And learning to figure out what that meant. And so much of that is the immigrant experience, is defining what we think of as Irish, which isn't necessarily what now you go and you see this modern, bustling European place that people are immigrating to.
Yes.
It was the darker bits.
Absolutely.
We left because,
and then
but we're still proud
America.
of who we are.
Yes, and
claiming America.
Both my parents being raised by widowed aunts, they had similar backgrounds. To be American, I grew up on Long Island, where I really thought if you were a grandparent, you had an accent, because the Polish, Russian, Italian, Irish, Scottish brogues. So for me, everybody had somebody from somewhere as I was growing up. And my parents conveyed, and I'm not quite sure how they did this. I suppose they did it in language, but the Irish are also very good with silences. And what they conveyed was, you're Irish, your grandparents were Irish, and being Irish American is the best kind of American to be. But don't brag about it, because all the Poles and the Italians will feel bad about themselves. So it was very, none of this my father loved to say the stage Irish. He would have cousins come over from Ireland and he would roll his eyes. They're more Irish than the Irish. It's not authentic. You're American. Don't overdo it. And yet, now my youngest son, fell in love with Irish music. And so he had that distance to be proud of his Irish heritage without that in-between of, oh, it was a terrible place. My grandmother, my great aunt, whenever I asked her about it when I got curious in high school, she would say, if it was worth talking about, I wouldn't have left it.
That's great.
But it's interesting, because that's very typical when you look at, and you go to sociology classes and you look at what the typical model is for the immigrant experience, that it takes getting to the third or so before you sort of go back and celebrate and realize and appreciate the things that make you who you are in that way, through that lens. And I think for me, when I had that summer abroad, it also instigated me to learn a little bit more about not just modern Ireland, but the politics of it and the history of it. And the thing in me that made me a journalist was asking questions and figuring out, well, but why? And Ireland has got such a great tortured history and politics and things for you to explore if you are into politics, certainly. And for me, it was a very unusual way I got to know more about it. My father, because of the tight-knit Irish Catholic community he grew up in, had some really great friends who he stayed in touch with, went on, had successful careers. One of them became very involved in what eventually became the Irish peace process. Some of the Irish Americans who were instigating that, pressuring that, lobbying for it to get people like Jerry Adams visas to come to the United States, things that were transformative events that the Irish American community made possible for modern Ireland, which is a fascinating phenomenon. And so it's not a usual thing for a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid writing a paper or doing a history project to get to go in and have my father take me to these events and meet the people who are in these negotiations and doing these things. And it's pretty remarkable to think of that connection for me. That's one of the things I think is so interesting in explaining what being Irish American is, and how that identity impacted not just my work, but my thinking and my analysis, and sort of all dovetailed into why I became a journalist. So for you, Congresswoman, I mean, is there a way that you figured out how to connect to that, to the Irish part, to the Irish American part?
Well, as we were discussing in the back a little bit, sort of a similar thing, some father influence there. In where I grew up in upstate New York, it was less Irish than I find where I live now in the Philadelphia suburbs, where there's a very strong cultural history. My daughter ended up doing Irish step dancing, and that was not something that was part of the culture where I grew up. But sort of the mid-century Irish Catholic experience in the US and President Kennedy. So my dad graduated from law school and came to Washington to work for President Kennedy, right out of law school. So this is my second trip down here. I was a little too young to appreciate, although I do have a very early memory of going to, I believe, the White House Christmas party or something, and being introduced to someone. And my father was being very respectful, and he was never very respectful. He was always joking around. So I just have this image of this very tall person, and my father saying, "Sir, I'd like to introduce my daughter," or something, which that made more of an impression than whoever it was he was introducing me to, but apparently it was President Kennedy.
Wow.
So just having that service orientation, and then my dad went on to be involved in Robert Kennedy's campaigns for the Senate, and then for the White House, at a local level. But that whole service and the Irish Americans are running the world, clearly that had some impact.
And I think Kennedy was watershed for the Irish
Yes.
American.
Right.
My grandmother, the mother of the two, was in the front row at the inauguration for John F. Kennedy. I think she thought she gave birth to him. She had on her walls of her apartment in Brooklyn, there was the Sacred Heart and there was JFK.
Right.
In every house.
My grandmother,
yes,
same
yes.
way. What do you think, what is that? Is that just the obvious, we made it as immigrants? Is it, how much of that is a Catholic identity? Mm-hmm. How much of that is Irish identity? And how much is being Irish American about that Catholic identity?
I think there was a little bit of that. I mean, I saw with my father, he was always striving. I mean, we used to joke that my dad wanted to be a WASP and his brother wanted to be Italian. I mean, because that was kind of the ruling groups in the town where I grew up. But it was still kind of striving, the Irish Catholic, the old animus, and whether or not you were truly accepted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was a sense of, especially for my parents' generation, that we used to joke as kids, identifying with the oppressor. Irish women who worked in domestic life for wealthy Protestant families then came home and they wanted those manners. They wanted to identify with, they saw that as very American. So my father was a Goldwater Republican, even though he was a first-generation Irishman. And my grandmother on my mother's side had JFK on the wall. My mother voted Democratic until she got married, voted Republican through her whole married life, and as soon as my father died, she went back to voting Democratic.
Oh my gosh.
So you grew up very aware of your identities. Do you, in your list of superlatives or in self-descriptors, do you throw that in there when someone asks, sort of, well, who are you?
Well, for me, it's inevitable because my work is so much about Irish Americans. And honestly, that was not something, my interest in Irish Americans is not what made me write novels about Irish Americans. It was just, I knew these people. I've heard a playwright named Romulus Linney make the proposition that all drama is family drama. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. So I wanted to write about family drama. I wanted to write about the things that take place among people who are stuck together. And O'Neill said it, in blood and love. And so for me, it was not the Irishness, it was just sort of material at hand. It really only until I started writing about the Irish that I found myself being more welcomed into the Irish community and then realizing, oh my gosh, I know all these people. They're all the same. We all act like this. Wow, we're really Irish.
Well, but also if you're working with Irish American families, you've got a lot of material to work with.
Right.
Yes.
That's fair. I guess I do put it in my list of self-descriptors quite often, but some of that was also in my evolution of how I thought of myself as I got to know politics, as I got to know what made me unique in my experience. And when I went off to college, and I ended up friends with people I went to the University of Virginia, wahoo wah, and met people from all over the world, from all over the country, and it wasn't typical to them that when you're 5 years old, your mom put you in Irish step dancing classes. They'd never heard of a fesh. They thought it was weird. They were like, oh yeah, that river dance thing, which by the way, was a seminal moment when I was a 13-year-old kid. And like, this thing I used to have to explain to people, and people say, oh, it's clog dancing. You're like, no, it's Irish step dancing. And all of a sudden, Michael Flatley's, on Broadway, and it becomes this moment. And it was a moment that kind of dovetailed with so much in Ireland at that time economically, but it was a moment for little Irish American girls like me to have something that people understood now in describing an experience. But when I got to college and I met other kids from other parts of the country who didn't have the hyphen, who were just, oh, I'm from the South. I grew up in Connecticut, outside of Manhattan. Everyone I knew had a hyphen. That's kind of a normal thing where I grew up, particularly in the North. A lot of the kids from the South don't think of themselves that way, or didn't, that I got to know. And then when I got to know people from overseas as well, and trying to describe when they'd say, oh, Americans don't have culture, or they don't have this, or they just have the American pie part. I'd be like, wait a second, there's a lot of different flavors of being American, and there are a lot of different American experiences. And it made me think more about that. Do you put that, Congresswoman, in your self-description?
It does tend to come out because people want to know where the name came from.
Sure.
And, are you Southern? No, I'm Irish American. But really, it comes out, I think, as I was discussing with my staff and preparing for this, really comes out in kind of the cultural experiences you have. And there was a question about, strong Irish American women in your family, and I have a cousin here who helped me mine for some of this material, but we have two great aunts in our family who really, I think, lit the way, in a way, for us. One was Sister Roberta, because of course we had a lot of religious in the family. Sister Roberta was the designated driver for her convent well into her 90s, because she still had her license. And the story that my cousin told me that I forgot, my father was a federal judge, and during the Vietnam War, Sister Roberta was protesting at many of the military bases nearby, and he was deathly afraid he was going to have to arraign his aunt the nun. And it would not have gone well for him. And the other one is the other side of the Irish family. Aunt Tass, both of these women lived till 99. I mean, they were strong Irish women. Aunt Tass, at a certain point, had to use a walker, but she would use it to go over to the local high school and do laps around the track for exercise. And there was steps to get down there, and it was kind of hard to get the walker up. So someone called the police one day and said, there's a woman having trouble down there. And so by the time the police caught up with her, she was almost back at her apartment. And they said, excuse me, ma'am, but we heard there was an elderly woman who was confused and having trouble. And she said, I'll let you know if I see her. I mean, just not taking anything from anybody.
That's what formed your thinking.
Pretty closely. And with that, I'm afraid
to
that
go for
I
your
have
vote.
been
Yes,
called to
you
go
have been
vote,
called.
so I have to go do that. Thank you so much for having me here. This was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thankfully, it's a short commute for the Congresswoman back to work. But I do want to go on and have more of our conversation, but I've been told the library has something they want to share with the two of us. And I'm going to ask Elizabeth Peterson, Chief of the Library's American Folklife Center, to share that with us.
Hi there. I'm sort of sorry to break up this really wonderful conversation, but I think it is sort of an opportunity to talk about the collections in the library and how they provide some of the cultural foundation or underpinnings for some of the family experiences that you all have been talking about. And Margaret, I wanted to say you need to come to the Folklife Center. We have a lot of interviews and photographs of Michael Flatley pre-Riverdance from Chicago in the early 70s. So come on down anytime. But as Margaret said, I'm Betsy Peterson, and I'm the director of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress. And the American Folklife Center was created by an act of Congress in 1976 and placed here at the library with the mandate to preserve and present American folklife. And we do that through a range of activities, including cultural documentation, archival preservation, research, reference services, concerts, lectures, exhibitions, publications, training. And our legislation specifically mentions, very wisely, I think, the diversity of the United States as a great source of strength. And we're charged by Congress with maintaining and promoting that diversity in our collections and our activities. And so, at least for us, what this means is that we get to help people discover and explore their cultural heritage and the cultural heritage of their neighbors. And we get to do that every day, and it's something that we love to do. The American Folklife Center, the archive at our center, is a little bit older and was established in the Library of Congress in 1928. And it's now one of the largest archives of ethnographic materials from the United States and around the world. We take care of over 6 million items of documentation recorded from the 19th century to the present. And whatever your background, I have a feeling that we have something in the archive for you. And many of our collections are online at loc.gov. But for those that aren't, we have a public reading room right here in the Jefferson Building, and in fact, right down the hall. And in this archive, I want to say, as you can imagine, we have a wealth of material from Irish American communities, including personal stories, crafts, food traditions, folktales, dance, and much more. And our archive is particularly strong in Irish and Irish American music. We have some of the earliest field recordings made of traditional Irish music in America, and we acquire more collections every year. So we thought it would be nice to bring some of this Irish American music along tonight, especially music that celebrates women and fearless and fierce women. Before the program got underway this evening, we gave a gift to our distinguished guests, and also including Ambassador Mulhall, which was a set of 10 field recordings involving Irish and Irish American music from 1904 up through 2006, focusing primarily on the experiences of women. And we brought one of those recordings with us tonight for you all to listen to. The song that you're going to hear is called Ireland's Green Shore, and it was often called Erin's Green Shore, and if you search on that title on the library's website, you're likely to find some printed versions of the lyrics that date back to the mid-19th century. But the version we're going to hear tonight is from oral tradition, and it's recorded from the Hammonds family, a West Virginia mountain family that we documented extensively in the 1960s and 70s. And the recording you will hear is a song sung by Maggie Hammonds Parker. Now, Mrs. Parker was born in the 19th century and passed away in the 1980s. And just as we've seen all these beautiful photographs with incredibly haunting eyes, I think the recording of her voice is a living link that connects our lifetimes now and the past. So before I go, I just want to say once again, welcome to our distinguished guests, and I want to invite you to come back, and anytime you're welcome, and I want to invite everyone in the audience, please come. Visit and explore the Irish American collections in our archives, explore other cultural traditions in the Folklife Reading Room at the American Folklife Center. So here, let's listen to Maggie Hammonds Parker, and thank you so much.
On the banks of some cold purling stream, I sit down on a bed of primroses. I gently fell into a dream. I dreamt that I saw a fair female. It is equals I never saw before, as a sight for the laws of our country, as we strayed on Ireland's green shore. Her cheeks was like two blooming roses, her teeth was like ivory so white, her eyes shone like two sparkling diamonds, the stars on some cold frosty night. She was dressed in a richest attire, and green were the mantle she wore, all bound round with the hemlocks and the roses, as we strayed on Ireland's green shore. Transgression of joy I've woken, I found this was only a dream. That pretty fair female that fled me, I long to be slumbering again. May the heavens above be her guardian, for I know I'll never see her no more. May the glorious the sunbeam shine upon her, as she lies sleeping on Ireland's green shore.
Well, that was a haunting voice.
Can you dance to that?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. But it is interesting sort of thematically as we think of St. Bridget's Day and of celebrating the lesser known Irish saint. as compared as the ambassador was talking about, to St. Patrick's Day, which is such a huge part of American culture. Irish American women are obviously a huge and vocal part of our culture. You were talking about, was it your aunt who was passing between Democrat and Republican identity and going back and forth?
Yeah,
your mother.
But
I'm not sure. I find that model of what it used to mean, the Irish Catholic Democrat, is gone. Certainly. It's not as pigeonholed now politically to identify Irish Americans that way, and certainly not Irish American women. And it's interesting, if you look at that model, what it means to be an Irish American woman today. I don't know. I think it changes generation by generation in some ways. That adjacentness to the immigrant experience, as you get a few generations out. Do you think it means something?
Well, clearly, I agree with you, especially the image of the Irish American Democrat, social justice, progressive, Al Smith
right.
In New York. Certainly, I won't call them a rogues gallery. I'll just say we have quite a few Irish Americans close to this administration, and I don't think any of them fit that bill in the least. So obviously it's changing. But I think the interesting thing is, and this is maybe something that I've seen in my own life, being just second generation, and having some sense of that change that we were talking about, the new immigrant wanting to embrace the new world, the first generation wanting to be more American, and then, as with yourself, being able to claim your heritage. And maybe this is the Catholic part of me, but I do think there's something spiritual about that, or it may just be something genetic that endures, so that it's even as things are changing in the 21st century, and you can't pigeonhole the politics or the worldview even of someone of Irish American descent. And I guess I see it especially in the women. The contrariness, the willingness to contradict. I mean, it is true that at the turn of the last century, more than any other immigrant group, the Irish immigrants were predominantly single females. That didn't happen with the Italians or the Polish or the Germans, who mostly came over in family groups. That sense of not only going to the new world, but going on your own.
It's pretty remarkable.
It's very remarkable, yeah.
And at young ages as well.
At very young ages, and then pulling everybody else over, and being employed, and marrying late, which was also a big part of that demographic. So I guess listening to the music made me recall when my youngest son, who embraced Irish music and sort of introduced me to that whole part, my mother and her sisters never wanted to hear it. My poor grandmother would try to put the radio on and find some Irish music, and they would say, oh, turn off that Kamalia music. Bing Crosby was as close as they wanted to get to Irish music. But when my son embraced it, all of us in my generation was sort of amazed, because I never listened to it, and my parents never listened to it. And he was just about to compete in his first flaw, and Finbar Fury, a great Irish piper, and my son was a piper, pulled him aside and said, now when you compete tomorrow, you're not playing for yourself. You're not playing for the judges. You're playing for the spirit of your ancestors who are now making themselves known through you.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh, the poor kid, he just wants to play. But there is that sense, I think, in the Irish identity, and I see it very strongly in Irish women, of there is something of the spirit of our ancestors that, whether we agree, but there, in the success, in the willingness to speak up, in the willingness to claim our own, that persists.
You put it much more eloquently than what I was going to say, which is that I jokingly sometimes say that growing up in a big, loud, opinionated Irish family was really great training for the job I do now when I'm moderating and pushing back and arguing. But having that conviction of your own opinion and having a voice to it.
Yes.
And having very strong women within your own family. And not thinking twice about that, but having that be a mainstay.
Absolutely.
Is something pretty remarkable culturally. I mean, for me now, journalism-wise, there's a lot of really great Irish Americans. I work with one of them. Nora O'Donnell is the anchor of our evening broadcast. You've got Margaret Brennan, and the job on Face the Nation, so CBS is going long Irish Americans, I think, or at least Irish American women, as we joke. But is there something to that willingness to question, to push back, to be something more? I don't know. I often point to things that were formative for me personally, which is my father was always challenging me on, well, back up what you're saying. Explain it, analyze it, pushing that back and forth at the dinner table. That particularly when I went to friends' houses or you start dating and you're like, that doesn't happen in every family.
Right.
And having that be normal conversation that to some families might sound like yelling.
Of course,
no,
right.
that's just we're just
you
all sharing our opinion.
Argument is sport. Yes,
argument
is fun. It's how you show you love each other. You scream at each other, slam the door.
And you explore this in your writing.
Right, yeah. And I think, I mean, the myth of the Irish patriarchy is that it is a patriarchy. I mean, with the patriarchal Catholic Church running things in Ireland for so long, and with Irish men sort of thinking they're running things for so long, what's remarkable is that it really has always been a matriarchal society. That the women have always, they may have been home, they may not have always been in careers, but they were there and they were speaking up. And that idea of, I think of myself as being grown up with two older brothers who became lawyers. My father, who read everything, was very opinionated. I became a writer because I never got to finish a sentence at the dinner table, and I had things to say. But at the same time, it was also that, on the one hand, I would hear, don't be argumentative. Oh, you're always contradicting. And on the other hand, it was, come on, contradict. Because that's how we speak to each other.
So this is what gave you all the fodder for the
characters.
Absolutely,
right.
That you write about. Do you see, is there a prominent, I don't even know that you look outwards with this kind of lens, but is there a prominent Irish American woman that you look to today in your field beyond yourself, or in the political sphere, or other industries?
I think what it is not so much identifying as an Irish American. I think I identify those women, and many of them are Irish American, but not necessarily. I see it in AOC, who will not stop. That nevertheless she persisted. That's very Irish, whether it's coming from an Irish woman or not. That sense of, I do have something to say, and I will say it. And maybe that is the American part of the Irish American. My mother finally went to Ireland for the first time when she was 80. A bunch of my cousins took her over there. And she visited Bundoran, where her mother was from. And when she came back, and I had been many times, and wasn't it beautiful? Didn't you love it? And she said, oh, no, it's very nice. No, it's very nice. So I thought, okay, what's wrong? And she said, I'm so glad my mother moved to Brooklyn. And I thought, that makes us American, because all of us hyphenated. We're the stock of people who said, this is okay, but I think there's something better. Or I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm going someplace else. They're dreamers or they're desperate, but they're not the people who stayed comfortable. They're the people who were contradicting and saying, I'm not putting up with it, I'm going somewhere else. And I think that's what makes any of us hyphenated. That's the important part of the American part. We all come from stock who said, I don't know where I'm going. I'm taking a tremendous risk. I'm giving up everything. I may never come back, but I'm going. It's amazing.
the immigrant experience. It really is.
It's who we are, Americans. Yeah.
I'm told there are questions, I believe, for us. I think I can hand over my moderating.
Thanks for, unless a crook appears from the side stage, we do have a few minutes for questions. And I hope we have folks on each side of the hall with microphones. So if you want to raise a hand if you have a question, we'll go from there.
Do you want some water?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Alice, I wanted to pick up on this idea of the that pull of the Irish woman and the connection, and I'm wondering if the landscape of Ireland has something to do with the pull in the music and that connection still. I know John O'Donohue, God rest his soul, speaks to that, but could you talk a little bit about the landscape of Ireland as related to our Irish-American background?
What an interesting question. Thank you. Well, there's the idea of an island race, which is what the Irish are. So that's why we all look alike, you know? And use about the same 5 names for baptismal names. But I think that's the part of the geography that interests me, the island. That younger son that I was talking about, who was the Irish pipe player, spent a year on Inishmaan, the middle of the 3 islands of the Aran Isles. And so we got to visit him there. There was this sense always on the island of Inishmaan, and I think writ small, it may be some sense of the geography, pertinent to your question, of Ireland itself. You always heard the sea, even if it was just a gentle whisper, but it was always there. And there was some way of making you feel unique because you were on an island and surrounded by water, mortal, very aware of your mortality, but also part of the great ocean that's just right out there. And it was that made me wonder if maybe that's why John Millington Synge was told by Yeats to go to Aran, because it's not just that the language was there and the people were so typically who they were, but there is that sense of this small place, this small rock we live on in the midst of this churning sea. And I think that has to soak into your worldview and again, maybe that your spirit, your DNA, something precarious about it, something very mortal about it, and yet something slightly immortal about it. That's where the church comes in.
That's beautifully put. You say the island experience. It's funny because 23andMe, that's a very American thing to do your genetic testing to figure out where you're from. We did that in my family. My mom's side, as I said, has been here longer. My dad's results came back 98% Irish. Who's 98% Irish? How do you even get that? If you live on an island until you come to America. It's pretty funny. Sorry.
Do we have any other questions? Raise your hand if you want to take the microphone. Here.
Hi. Earlier you said something very interesting that struck me, and it had to do with the silences. So I'm curious how you feel the landscape for Irish American women might be changing now that we've found our voice.
Also a wonderful question. I think that the silence, at least it's been my observation among the Irish and Irish Americans, I'm sure part of it is that they lost their language or that to a large extent it was taken away from them, so they were making use of the language of the oppressor and claiming it. I think that's why we have so many wonderful Irish writers. But I think also that was an incentive to to make use of what is not said. And I don't know any other race that makes use of what is not said as well as the Irish do. So I'm not sure that that silence indicates a lack of voice. We're not silent because we don't know what to say. We're silent because we know how to use the silence. And we have a sense, and again, I see this as both biological and genetic and spiritual in some way, that our language will never get us to where we want to go. That may be, again, the history of it's not our language. That it will fail us, that we get to a point where language can no longer describe or connect to what it is we want to say, but silence somehow can. So I don't see silence as something that needs to be corrected. As a matter of fact, I wish we trust silence more in the 21st century. I think maybe the less said, and this was a favorite saying in my family, the less said, the better.
So my wife wants me to take that, was it me in 23 thing, the DNA testing, because she thinks it'll be very funny if it comes back that I'm not Irish. And even funnier if I'm English. So as we're running a little long, thank you very much for the questions. Thanks to all of you for attending our National Book Festival Presents program tonight. We hope to see you on February 13th when we will honor the legacy of civil rights icon Rosa Parks. As you leave, please be sure to pick up a free copy of the photo album of the Irish, courtesy of the Embassy of Ireland. The books will be at the registration desk and just around the corner from where we will have Alice's book for sale. Alice will be in the Whitehall Pavilion next door. It's this direction to sign copies of her latest novel, The Ninth Hour. So, can we please have a round of applause for our extraordinary panel? Gura Mahagat, which is Irish for thanks very much, and have a good night.